Welcome back. Tonight, I am introducing a new series on the channel. It's actually going to be several series that share a similar theme: ancient mythology from around the world. The first one, the one we are going to look at tonight, is ancient Egyptian mythology and legends. It's going to consist of several shorter stories that share a common thread. The other areas are going to be ancient Greek, Roman, Chinese mythology, as well as North and South American fables and mythology. And of course, my personal favorite, although I might be biased, Norse mythology. And I will create new playlists for each separate area, as well as one big mythology playlists that gather them all in one place. I hope you guys enjoy this new series. As always, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps me out a lot. So, with all that said, let's start with tonight's episode. As I mentioned, we are going to take a look at ancient Egyptian mythology. Ancient Egyptian culture has fascinated the world for millennia. Even today, gigantic pyramids and magnificent temple complexes bear witness to the country's ancient greatness and its splendor. The practice of mummifying the dead and the cult surrounding them has also made it possible for us to form a picture of the people who lived then and of their everyday lives. Unfortunately, only a small number of stories from that time have been preserved, but they are sufficient to show us the variation and imaginative power of Egyptian literature. Whether the stories deal with the pharaohs and their heroic deeds and bravery, or whether a tale conveys the wisdom of a hardworking farmer, divine beings are involved. They are present everywhere, and the Egyptians treated them with both humor and reverence, which is clearly reflected in the texts. The gods did not belong only to the great temples, but were, to the highest degree, a part of everyday life. Part 1. The Two Kingdoms. For several hundred years, Europeans have been fascinated by ancient Egypt. When Emperor Napoleon invaded the country in 1798, he brought with him a group of scholars whose task was to investigate and document pyramids, obelisks, and other ancient monuments. It was one of Napoleon's soldiers who discovered the famous Rosetta Stone, on which the same royal inscription appeared, written partly in Greek and partly twice in Egyptian, using two different scripts. In 1822, the gifted young French scholar Jean Champollion succeeded, with the help of the Rosetta Stone, in deciphering the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, thus giving a voice to the distant past. Throughout the 19th century, scholars traveled across Egypt to sketch temples and tombs and to record various inscriptions. These early drawings are often extremely valuable, since so much has been destroyed or lost over the last 100 years. The earliest excavators were scarcely anything more than ordinary treasure hunters. Their primary goal was to find magnificent objects or mummies to take home to European museums. Gradually, the importance of more methodical excavations was recognized, and archaeologists came to understand that a shard from a broken clay pot or a fragment of a papyrus scroll could be more significant than, for example, a gold vase, because of the information it could provide about ancient Egypt. In the middle of the 19th century, the French scholar Auguste Mariette entered the service of the Khedive of Egypt, where he founded the Cairo Museum and the Egyptian Antiquities Service, which still has the task of supervising ancient monuments and conducting excavations. It was Mariette who, in 1881, became suspicious of the unusually large number of ancient royal jewels that suddenly began appearing on the market. During his investigations, he soon discovered a family from Korana who had found an entire burial chamber filled with the mummified bodies of some of the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt. In 1898, additional royal mummies were found in a tomb in the famous Valley of the Kings. And today one can study more closely, at the Cairo Museum, the facial features of the men who ruled Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. It was not only the French who carried out excavations in Egypt. The Egypt Exploration Fund, founded in London in 1882, financed numerous expeditions, and the British archaeologist W.M.F. Petrie, who worked in Egypt and Palestine for 60 years, established new standards for excavations and the mapping of ancient sites. It was also a British research team that went on to make one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. In 1922, after many years of work in the Valley of the Kings, Howard Carter discovered an almost intact pharaonic burial from the 14th century BCE. The tomb of Tutankhamun, with all of its treasures, aroused enormous interest in Egyptology. Since that day, expeditions from all over the world have worked to rediscover Egypt's magnificent ancient past. Many of the distinctive features of Egyptian civilization can be derived from the country's unique geographical structure. Egypt is a land of contrasts, and the greatest contrast lies between the red desert landscape and the black fertile Nile Valley. In the distant past, the Egyptian desert was covered with grass, and large grazing herds roamed the land, much like the savannas farther south in present-day Africa. The earliest Egyptians were hunters, a nomadic people who followed the movements of these herds. Gradually, the climate became drier, the savanna dried out, and was transformed into desert, and people sought refuge along the Nile, where they turned marshland into fertile farmland. The sky in ancient Egypt was clear and bright blue, and rain was an almost unknown phenomenon. It was only along the Nile, which flooded the surrounding land every year, that crops could be cultivated. The inundation, which brought fertile soil from the river's upper reaches, could to some extent be controlled with the help of dikes and canals. But there was nevertheless a limit to how much arable land humans could create. In the south, cultivable land consisted only of a narrow strip on either side of the river. Everything else was desert. In the north, the Nile branched out before flowing into the Mediterranean Sea. At first, every small Egyptian community or tribal area had its own ruler, but gradually leaders emerged who laid claim to ruling entire groups of communities. Around the 4th millennium BCE, some of these leaders began to call themselves kings, and their kingdoms grew larger and larger. The ancient Egyptians believed that a man named Menes had once ruled the south, the kingdom of Upper Egypt, and that he had waged war against the northern part of the country, the kingdom of Lower Egypt. Around 3000 BCE, the south succeeded in defeating the northern kingdom, and Menes came to rule the entire Egyptian realm from his new capital, Memphis. The Egyptians organized their rulers into dynasties, and Menes became the first king of the first dynasty. Modern historians divide the 30 dynasties that ruled over Free Egypt into 7 main periods. The most important of these were the Old Kingdom, approximately 2575 to 2134 BCE, the Age of the Pyramid Builders, the Middle Kingdom, about 2040 to 1640 BCE, when the country was reunited under a ruler from the south, and the New Kingdom, about 1550 to 1070 BCE. Between these different kingdoms, periods of political chaos prevailed. Foreign invaders could then invade and cause great devastation, and since Upper and Lower Egypt differed greatly in character, there was always a risk that they would separate again under a weak ruler. Egypt never entirely freed itself from the fact that it consisted of 2 kingdoms. The ruler was always called Lord of the Two Lands, King of Upper and Lower Egypt. He wore a double crown composed of the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, and he was often depicted together with his 2 protective goddesses, the 2 ladies, Nekbet, the vulture goddess from the south, and Wadjet, the cobra goddess from the north. But one thing all Egyptians shared was a common belief: reverence for everything that was royal. The king was holy, a personification of the sun god himself. A large part of the king's time was devoted to performing elaborate religious rites, but he was also actively involved in overall responsibility for the government. Since he was a sovereign ruler, he possessed unrestricted power, but this power was only to be used for the good of the people. When an Egyptian king was crowned, he was required to recite what had taken place at the creation of the world and to vow to defeat chaos and establish Mat. Mat means order, justice, and truth. And this Mat was personified in a goddess who was the daughter of the sun god. The king was to live in truth, rule with impartial justice, and cause Egyptian society to reflect the heavenly order created by the gods. Since kings were considered to be more than merely human, they constituted a link between humankind and the gods, and could therefore pray for peace and prosperity for the entire Egyptian empire. A single god was worshipped throughout the land, but in addition, every region of Egypt had its own local god or goddess. Several of these deities expressed the most prominent characteristics of different animals and were commonly depicted either in animal form or as humans with animal heads. Thus, for example, the god Chnum, the potter, was depicted as a powerful ram or as a man with a ram's head, and the goddess Taurid, the special protector of women in childbirth, had the paws of a lion, the back of a crocodile, and the thick body of a hippopotamus, while the goddess Hathor's complex nature was expressed in different forms, ranging from a bloodthirsty lioness to a gentle cow. There was a very large number of gods and goddesses worshipped in ancient Egypt, but behind this diversity lay the belief that, at their core, they were one and the same deity. Egyptian source texts often refer simply to God, but the creator's supernatural qualities appeared in many different divine forms, both male and female, beautiful and ugly, violent and benevolent. Ordinary people focused their worship on those beings that best corresponded to their own lives, or on the local god or goddess. These local gods could become nationally significant if they became patron deities of a royal dynasty. One of the king's foremost duties was to build temples and houses for the gods and to offer daily sacrifices to them. In return, the gods were expected to grant the king a long life, good health, and the strength to defeat his enemies. If a king had ruled for 30 years, he celebrated a said festival. During this festival, which lasted several days, the king participated in various initiation rites so that the gods would bless him with long life and renewed strength. Everything had to be performed twice, once for Upper Egypt and once for Lower Egypt, and one of the most important ceremonies involved the king running around a specially constructed course. This may have served as proof that he was still physically strong enough to rule as a living representative of the sun god, and in very ancient times, a king who could not complete the run was probably ritually killed. In later periods, however, the king was generally allowed to die a natural death. It was considered of great importance for the entire nation that the gods received the king into eternal life after death, so that he could overcome death in the same way the sun conquered darkness each morning. For this reason, the burials of Egyptian kings were extremely elaborate and complex, and the most impressive element was, naturally, the construction of a funerary pyramid. At the time when Egypt was first unified, houses, palaces, and temples were built of reeds or mud brick, but, thus, during the Third Dynasty, about 2649 to 2575 BCE, Imhotep, history's first great architect, constructed a stepped pyramid of stone for his deceased ruler, King Djoser. During the Fourth Dynasty, circa 2575 to 2456 BC, the Egyptians built enormous, smooth-sided pyramids in the desert outside Memphis. The largest of these pyramids, the Pyramid of Cheops at Giza, is 146 meters high and contains approximately 2,300,000 stone blocks, each of which weighs between 2 and 15 tons. Despite their immense size, the pyramids at Giza were constructed with astonishing precision. We do not know exactly how these pyramids were built, but it is clear that copper tools and very simple methods were used. The Egyptians were not great innovators in technology, but they possessed a strong sense of organization and had ample access to both labor and time. As soon as a king ascended the throne, he began building his pyramid. Approximately 4,000 craftsmen were engaged in quarrying, shaping, and fitting together the large stone blocks. The largest part of the workforce was devoted to dragging the stone blocks from the limestone quarries to the construction site itself. Once the blocks had been cut, they were loaded onto barges and transported downstream on the Nile to the vicinity of Giza. There they were unloaded again and placed on wooden sledges that were dragged over logs to the pyramid site itself. Finally, the stone blocks were hauled up ramps of sand and stone that surrounded the half-finished pyramid to the places where they were to be set. It is a mistake to believe that the pyramids were built by slaves who were forced to toil and drag under the whip. The main workforce was drawn from the farmers, who each year were without work for 3 or 4 months, while the fields lay underwater. As many as 100,000 people may have worked together to move the enormous quantities of stone involved in building a pyramid for their divine king. The Great Pyramid is now approximately the same color as the desert in which it stands, but originally it was covered with gleaming white limestone and had a gilded capstone. Adjacent to the pyramid were two temples connected by a stone-paved causeway, and in a special grave near the pyramid, a boat of natural size was placed for the king's use in the afterlife. When the king's body had been embalmed, it was taken to the first temple, the Valley Temple, which contained 22 royal statues. There the mummy was purified and a ritual was performed that was intended to infuse the statues with life, so that the king himself could take possession of them as manifestations of his physical body. The royal coffin was then dragged through the causeway into the second temple, where further ceremonies took place, and where the priests were to continue making offerings to the king's spirit for several hundred years after his death. Finally, the coffin was carried through a narrow passage into the heart of the pyramid, where it was placed in a stone sarcophagus inside the burial chamber. In pyramids from the 5th and 6th dynasties, 2465 to 2152 BCE, inscriptions appear on the inner walls, and these texts may have been the same ones as those read out aloud by the priests during the royal burials. The pyramid texts vary in age and character. Some are humble prayers that the king may be allowed to unite with the gods and serve them. Others are more forceful, even arrogant in nature. In the so-called cannibal hymn, the deceased king is portrayed as so powerful that he can kill the gods and devour them in order to take possession of their supernatural powers. The great gods are for the morning, the medium ones for midday, the small ones for the evening meal, and the old ones for fuel beneath his cooking pot. It says in the hymn, when the rituals were completed, the priests withdrew, while at the same time lowering large stone blocks into the passages to seal the entrance to the burial chamber. Despite these precautions, not a single intact royal tomb from the time of the Old Kingdom has ever been found. Thieves may have managed to break into the tombs and steal the valuable objects that the king had taken with him into death. The pyramids themselves, however, remain standing as the greatest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and they are the only one of these wonders that has survived into our own time. Archaeologists do not study only gods and kings. A great deal has also been discovered about the daily lives of ordinary people in ancient Egypt. Most of our information about everyday life comes from the New Kingdom, and one of the best sources for this knowledge is the town of Deir el-Medina in southern Egypt. During the New Kingdom, kings were buried in large tombs cut directly into the rock in desolate valleys near the city of Thebes, the religious capital of the south. The government established a town in nearby Deir el-Medina for the craftsmen who carved and decorated the royal tombs. The craftsmen lived with their wives and children in brick houses built along narrow streets within a walled town. When the houses were first constructed, they were all identical, but this soon changed as the inhabitants altered them, for example by adding interior walls or decorating rooms with wall paintings. In many of these houses, the room facing the street was used as a workshop. The second room, which was the largest, lay higher than the rest of the house and rested on pillars made of palm trunks. This room had no windows and was furnished with a kind of platform on which the master and mistress of the house had their seats. Otherwise, the house was probably sparsely furnished. Chairs were only for the wealthy, while folding stools and low wooden tables were commonly used. Behind this main room, there was often a small bedroom. Egyptian beds had wooden frames, sleeping surfaces made of woven reeds, and high footboards. The beds were covered with linen sheets, but instead of pillows, one rested one's head on a padded wooden headrest. Beside the bed stood chests painted to look like it was made of ivory and ebony, in which one stored clothing, jewelry, and cosmetics. During the New Kingdom, clothing usually consisted of finely draped and pleated linen. Women's close-fitting garments, as well as men's long kilts and wide shirts, were white. Color was added with gleaming pearl necklaces and with garlands of living flowers that were worn on festive occasions. Hairstyles could be very elaborate, and sometimes wigs made of dyed yarn were used. Both men and women painted their eyes, and a typical Egyptian cosmetic box might contain a mirror, a razor and tweezers made of copper, a jar of rouge, lipstick, green eyeshadow, black eyeliner, and various small jars containing the fragrant oils the Egyptians loved to use. None of the houses in Deir el-Medina were so luxurious as to include a bathroom, and corridors beside the bedroom led instead to an open kitchen area. The most important kitchen furnishings consisted of a vaulted oven made of fired clay, a grinding stone for grain, which made up a large part of the craftsman's wages, and cooking vessels in all shapes and sizes. The Egyptian diet consisted mainly of bread and beer, and in the small cellar behind the kitchen there were daily use jars of beer, and perhaps a little date wine. Dates or honey were used when baking sweet bread and cakes, and the Egyptians also enjoyed figs and pomegranates, grapes and watermelons. Beef and roasted goose were highly prized, but most people ate meat only on special occasions. Protein was obtained from dried fish, lentils, and peas. Other commonly occurring vegetables included, for example, leeks, onions, garlic, and cucumbers. From the kitchen area, a staircase led up to the roof, where vegetables were usually laid out to dry, and where one sometimes kept animals such as geese and goats. The Egyptians were very fond of animals, and were often depicted together with dogs, cats, or monkeys. When it was hot outside, people slept on the roof, and during the day one also sat there and played board games or chatted with neighbors. From the rooftops, the inhabitants of Deir el-Medina had a view of their family tombs on the mountain slopes above the village and of the village temple. Every house had its own small household altar, where one daily offered wine, bread, and flowers to a statue of a favorite god. In some houses there were wall paintings depicting the goddess Thoth and Bees, the lion-headed dwarf god, who, despite his frightening appearance, was the special protector of women and small children. Images of Thoth and Bees were also painted on beds and headrests to protect sleepers from snakes, scorpions, and all the dangers of the night. And people often carried small images of these gods on their bodies, so-called amulets. The Egyptians placed great faith in the magical power of these amulets. Almost all Egyptian jewelry consisted of various amulets, and every Egyptian wore them for protection from the cradle to the grave. They existed in hundreds of different forms, but most commonly, they were miniature images of gods or divine symbols, such as the falcon eye of the god Horus or the cow-horned human head of Hathor. The gods were not found only in the great temples, but were part of daily life, and it is the gods who dominate the stories that were told by the Egyptian people. And it is those stories we are going to dive into today. Part 2. The Chaotic Depths. The Egyptian religion certainly contained more symbols than myths, but around certain gods there also existed actual narrative traditions. Unfortunately, many of these myths were never written down in their entirety, since they were so well known to the general population. Often the stories must be pieced together from various fragments that appear in hymns and prayers, in temple inscriptions, pyramid texts, and sometimes from even more unusual sources, such as magical spells used to cure scorpion stings. There were many ancient Greek authors who were fascinated by the Egyptian gods and recorded stories about them, but it is difficult to know how closely these versions correspond to the original Egyptian traditions. Certain myths, such as the one concerning the murder of Osiris and his resurrection, were often performed in dramatized form during royal ceremonies or temple rituals. The literate priests at major religious centers, such as the Temple of Ra in Heliopolis, the Temple of Ptah in Memphis, or the Temple of Thoth in Hermopolis, would compile entire series of stories with their own local deity as the central figure. All of these series contain creation myths, for to the Egyptians, creation was the only truly meaningful event in history. All of society was oriented toward maintaining the divine order established by the Creator, and the idea of progress had no place in Egyptian thought. A dozen myths were not enough to describe the wonder of creation. The Creator had many forms and many names: Ra, Ra-Atum, Amun-Ra, Ra-Horachti, and Ra-Horachti. But all sources agree on one thing. In the beginning, he rose up from the water-filled abyss that was called Nun. In the beginning of time, everything was a chaotic sea. Darkness and silence reigned, but in the depths of this bottomless ocean, there already existed the Creator's formless spirit, who was the Father and Mother of all things. One myth tells how a mound of earth slowly rose from the chaotic depths, just as Egypt appears to rise from the water when the Nile withdraws during the hot summer. This mound of earth constituted the first land, and finally there was a place where the Creator could clothe himself in a body. In the form of a phoenix bird with flaming feathers, the Creator landed on this primeval land, and his cry was the first sound that broke the eternal silence. Another tale recounts that 8 beings with frog and snake heads swam about in the chaotic depths of the sea before the beginning of time. These were the Ogdod, the 8 beings, Nun and Nunet, the gods of the bottomless sea, He and Hehit, the gods of infinite space, Kek and Kekit, the gods of darkness, and Amanon and Amonet, the invisible gods. These mystical beings swam together and created the great egg from which the Creator would be born. Others believed that this primeval egg had been laid upon the high mound of earth by a goose whose cackling was the first sound. The great cackler sat for immeasurable ages on the mound of earth and brooded over its egg until it finally hatched, and a radiant phoenix bird emerged from it. The 2 eggshell halves separated the chaotic sea depths and created a space in which the Creator could shape his world. In a third tale, it is told how the sea depths were shrouded in darkness until the first lotus blossom rose from the deep. Slowly, the blue lotus opened its petals and revealed a young god seated in its golden center. A sweet fragrance spread across the water, and from the body of the divine child flowed a light that drove away the all-enveloping darkness. This child was the Creator, the sun god, the origin of all life. But each evening the lotus flower sinks again beneath the surface of the water and does not rise again until dawn. Thus each evening the first lotus blossom closes its petals and sinks once more into the depths of the sea. During the night, chaos again reigns until the god in the lotus flower returns. At the beginning of time, the chaotic forces were not defeated once and for all, but instead surrounded the earth in the form of serpents that hovered around space in order to attack the sun god. The struggle between order and chaos always recurs. Whatever form the Creator takes in the different myths, they all agree that even while he dwelt in the bottomless sea depths, he knew that he was alone. This loneliness became unbearable, and he longed for other beings with whom he could share a new world. In Memphis, the priests described how the Creator's thoughts shaped the gods and everything else that exists. When his thoughts had created them, he gave them life by giving them names. Thought and word were the creative forces. In Heliopolis, the priests called the Creator Ra-Atum, and they told how, after eons of solitude, he spat out Shu, the god of air, and Tephanet, the goddess of moisture. For a long time, Ra-Atum remained alone because he lost Shu and Tephanet in the chaotic sea depths. Then the Creator removed his one eye and filled it with his power. He called the eye his daughter and named it Hathor, and then sent her out into the darkness to search for his lost children. The eye's light pierced the chaotic forces, and soon Shu and Tephanet were found and could be brought back to their father. As a reward, the sun god placed the eye upon his forehead in the form of a great venomous cobra, the Uraeus serpent. He promised her that she would have power over his enemies and that both gods and humans in the future would fear her. Thereafter, Ra-Atum embraced his first children, Shu and Tephanet, and he wept with joy. When he held them in his arms, they were filled with his breath, and they, like all the other gods who would come, became part of the Creator's divinity. Part 3. The 9 Gods. Shu and Tephanet, Ra-Atum's first children, loved one another, and in time Tephanet gave birth to twins. The elder of the twins was Geb, the god of the earth, and the younger was Nut, the goddess of the sky. Geb loved his sister, the beautiful Nut, and for long ages they embraced one another. The sky was pressed down upon the earth, so that there was no space for anything to live or grow. At last, Ra-Atum grew jealous of Nut's great love for Geb, and commanded their father, Shu, to separate them. The mighty god of air then trampled down Geb. Then he lifted Nut in his open hand and held her high above her brother. Although Nut was pregnant, Ra-Atum laid a curse upon her so that she would not be able to give birth on any single day of the year. Geb struggled in despair beneath his father's feet, and Nut stretched herself downward, but they could not reach one another. In the meantime, the Creator had given life to many other beings, and among them was Thoth, the wisest of all the gods. Thoth looked up at Nut's beautiful body arching over the earth, and he loved her and felt compassion for her. He therefore decided to help the unfortunate goddess. And at once, he invented the game of drafts. Thoth challenged the other gods to play with him for time. Little by little, the wise god succeeded in winning so much time that it amounted to 5 days. The Creator had already fixed the length of the year at 360 days, but Thoth added the time he had won and thus created 5 extra days. These days were not included in Ra-Atum's curse, and so at last Nut was able to give birth to her children. On the first day, she gave birth to a child who was already crowned king, and he was given the name Osiris. On the second day, Hathor was born, and on the third, amid great pain, Seth was born. On the fourth and fifth days, 2 daughters were born, Isis and Nephthys. Osiris and Isis had fallen in love with one another already in the womb, and they became husband and wife. In time, Seth and Nephthys also married, but there was never any true love between them. Nut's 2 daughters were quite different from one another. Isis was brave and clever, and became the mistress of magic, wiser than millions of men, whereas Nephthys was loyal and gentle. The brothers Osiris and Seth were even more different. Osiris was handsome, noble, and generous. Seth had the head of a wild beast, which was characteristic of his nature, for he was greedy and cruel, and could never forgive his brother for being older than he, and thus destined to become king. Nut, together with her grandchildren Osiris and Isis, Seth and Nephthys, were worshipped as the 9 great gods under the name of the Ennead. The Creator gave life to many other gods and goddesses, and he filled the heavens above and the world beneath the earth with spirits and demons and lesser deities. Last of all, he created humankind. Some believe that humanity sprang from the joyful tears Ra-Atum shed when Shu and Tefnut were brought back to him from the chaotic depths of the primeval waters. Others believe that the first human was created by Cunning, the ram-headed god, upon his potter's wheel. When the Creator had breathed life into his new beings, he created a realm for them in which they could live, namely, Egypt. To protect Egypt, Ra-Atum surrounded the land with desert, but he created the river Nile so that it would flood the land and allow the soil to produce great harvests. Thereafter, he created all other lands, and for their sake he placed a Nile in the sky, the one we call rain. Ra established the seasons and the months, and covered the earth with trees, herbs, and flowers. Finally, he created all the different kinds of insects and fish, birds and animals, and breathed life into them. Each day, Ra-Atum walked through his kingdom or sailed across the vault of heaven in the boat of millions of years. Whenever the living beings of Egypt saw the sun, they rejoiced and praised their Creator. To hold back the forces of chaos and to fight for order and justice, Ra-Atum established kingship. He himself became Egypt's first and greatest king and ruled for centuries in joy and peace. Part 4. The Secret Name of Ra. Ra, the One Creator, was visible to the Egyptian people in the form of the solar disk, but he also revealed himself to them in many other shapes. He could manifest as a man wearing a crown upon his head, as a falcon or a falcon-headed man, and as the scarab beetle, which pushes a round ball of dung before it, just as the Egyptians imagined Ra as a scarab rolling the sun across the vault of heaven. In various caverns deep beneath the surface of the earth, there also hid a further 75 forms of Ra, mystical beings with mummified bodies and heads shaped like birds or serpents, feathers or flowers. Ra had as many names as forms. He was the Shining One, the Hidden One, the Renewer of the Earth, the Wind of Souls, the Self-Created. Yet, there existed a name of the Sun God that had not been spoken since the dawn of time. To know this secret name was the same as possessing power over Ra and over the world he had created. Isis longed to possess this power. She had dreamed that one day she would bear a wondrous falcon-headed son named Horus, and she wished to give Ra's throne to her child. Isis was the mistress of magic and wiser than millions of men. Yet she knew that nothing in creation was powerful enough to harm its own creator. Her only path was therefore to turn Ra's power against himself. And at last, Isis devised a cruel and cunning plan. Each day, the sun god walked through his kingdom, accompanied by a host of spirits and demigods. But Ra had begun to grow old. His eyes were dim, his steps were no longer steady, and he had even begun to speak to himself. One morning, Isis mingled with a group of demigoddesses and followed the king of the gods. She watched Ra's face constantly until she saw a drop of his saliva fall onto a clod of earth. When she was certain that no one had seen it, she scooped up the soil and carried it away. Isis kneaded the earth together with Ra's saliva until it became clay, and from this clay she fashioned a malevolent serpent. During the dark hours of the night, she sat whispering spells over the clay serpent as it lay lifeless in her hands. Then the cunning goddess carried it with her to a crossroads where the sun god always passed. She hid the serpent in the tall grass and returned to her palace. The next day, Ra came walking through his realm with the company of spirits and demigods behind him. As he approached the crossroads, Isis's spells began to take effect, and the clay serpent sprang to life. When the sun god passed by, it bit him on the ankle. The serpent then shriveled and collapsed back into the earth. Ra let out a cry that was heard throughout all of creation. His teeth chattered, and his legs trembled as the poison surged through his body like a flooding Nile. "I am pierced by something deadly," whispered Ra. "I feel it in my heart, though my eyes can see nothing." Whatever it was, the Lord of creation did not give it life. "I am certain that none of you would do something so terrible to me, yet never have I known such pain. How could this happen to me? I am the one creator sprung from the boundless depths of the primeval waters. I am the god with 1,000 names, yet my secret name has been spoken only once, and that was before the beginning of time. Thereafter it was hidden within my body so that no one might know it and pronounce curses against me. And yet something struck me as I walked through my kingdom, and now it feels like fire in my heart, and my limbs shake. Summon the Ened, fetch my children. They possess great magical knowledge, and their wisdom fills the heavens." The messengers sped away to the great gods, and the Ened came from the 4 pillars of the earth: Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, Seth and Osiris, Isis and Nephthys. The envoys traveled through earth and sky and through the bottomless depths of the waters to summon all the gods Ra had created. From the marshlands came the frog-headed Heket, the cobra goddess Wadjet, and the fear-inspiring god Sobek with the head of a crocodile. From the desert came the wild Salket, goddess of scorpions, Anubis, the jackal-headed protector of the dead, and Nekbet, the vulture goddess. From the cities of the north came the warlike Neith, the gentle cat-headed Bastet, the fierce lion-headed Sekhmet, and Ta, god of craftsmen. And from the southern cities came Onuris, the divine hunter, and the ram-headed Khnum with his wife, Anuket, and daughter Satis. Then came Thoth, and the wise Shashat, goddess of writing, the powerful Min, the serpent-headed Renanute, goddess of the harvest, the kindly Meshkinit, and the fearsome Taweret, goddess of childbirth. All were commanded to assemble before Ra. The gods and goddesses gathered, weeping and lamenting around the sun god, for they feared that he would die. Isis stood among them and beat her breast, feigning the same terror and confusion as the others. "Great Father," she began, "what has come upon you? Is it some serpent that has bitten you? Has some vile creature dared to rise up against its own creator? There are not many among the gods who are as wise as I am, and I am the mistress of magic. If you allow me to help you, I'm certain that I can heal you." Ra was grateful for this and told Isis what had happened. "Now I burn hotter than fire," lamented the sun god. "My sight grows dark, I cannot see the heavens, and my body is drenched in sweat from the fever. "Tell me your entire name," said the cunning Isis. "Then I can use it in my spells. If I do not know your name, there is no magic in the world that can heal you." "I am the creator of heaven and earth," replied Ra. "I created the heights and the depths. I placed the horizons in east and west and gave the gods their glory. When I open my eyes, there is light. When I close them, there is darkness. The mighty Nile floods when I command it. The gods do not know my true name, but I have created time and the festivals. I ignite the spark of life. At dawn I rise as Khepri, the scarab, and sail across the vault of heaven in the boat of millions of years. At midday I shine in the heavens as Aura, and in the evening I am Ra-Atum, the setting sun." "All of that we already know," said Isis. "But if I am to find a spell that can drive the poison from your body, I must use your secret name. Speak it, so that you may live." "I acquired my secret name in order to live in peace and quiet," groaned Ra, "without having to fear any living being. How then could I reveal it?" Isis did not answer, but fell to her knees beside the sun god as his suffering grew ever worse. When the pain became unbearable, Ra commanded the other gods to step back, and he whispered the secret name to Isis. "Now the power of the secret name has passed from my heart into yours," said Ra, exhausted. "In time you may pass it on to your son, but warn him he must never reveal the secret." Isis rejoiced and began to chant a mighty spell that drove the poison from Ra's body, and he rose to his feet, stronger than he had ever been before. The sun god returned to the boat of millions of years, and Isis went back rejoicing in the success of her plan. She now knew that her son Horus would one day sit upon Egypt's throne and rule by the power of Ra. Part 5. The Eye of the Sun. Hathor, Ra's daughter, could reveal herself in many different forms. She could be a cow or a cat, and to newborn children, she appeared as 7 beautiful women to foretell their fate. In human form, Hathor was the most graceful and enchanting of all the goddesses, but when she assumed the role of the Eye of the Sun, she could be the most violent and fearsome of them all. She was the gods' protector, yet when she was angry, even the gods were afraid of her. In various temple inscriptions and in a tale written in Egyptian as late as the 1st century BCE, it is told that there came a difficult time when Hathor abandoned her land and journeyed to Nubia. The Eye of the Sun grew jealous of the other gods and goddesses whom Ra had created. She quarreled with her father and set out southward, wandering through the deserts of distant Nubia. The enraged goddess cast off her beautiful human form and began to appear as a wildcat or a swift-footed lioness. She lived by hunting and killed every creature that came near her. In Egypt, despair reigned, for without Hathor, laughter and love withered away, and there was no longer any joy in life. The sun god hid his face in grief, and darkness spread across the earth. No one could console him for the loss of his beloved daughter. But that was not all, for the worst fear was that without the power of his eye, Ra was no longer secure against his enemies. Darkness closed in ever tighter. Light and chaos threatened order. "Who can bring Hathor back to me?" asked Ra. But the gods stood silent. The Eye of the Sun held power over life and death among all living beings, and the gods were afraid to approach her in her raging state. Then Ra summoned Thoth, the wisest of the gods, and commanded him to travel to Nubia to persuade Hathor to return to Egypt. With a heavy heart, Thoth did as the king of the gods had ordered, but he was convinced that if Hathor recognized him, she would kill him before he even had a chance to speak. Therefore, Thoth transformed himself into an ordinary, humble baboon. Thus he crept through the Nubian desert, following the bloody tracks left by the goddess. When he caught sight of her, she was a wildcat sitting upon a cliff, licking her golden brown fur. Thoth crawled toward her, striking his head against the ground as he spoke. "Greetings, daughter of the sun," he said humbly. Hathor arched her back and hissed, but when she saw that it was only a baboon, she did not bother to attack him at once. "Gracious goddess," stammered Thoth, Would a humble ape dare to speak with you? Speak and die, growled the wildcat, baring her claws. The baboon crouched low and kissed the ground as he murmured, "O mighty one, if it pleases you to kill me, I cannot stop you. But think upon the tale of Mother Vulture and Mother Cat." "What tale?" asked Hathor. "Listen, O gracious one," said the clever Thoth, "and I shall tell it." The wildcat sat down and began to wash herself again. She no longer seemed to pay any attention to the baboon, but Thoth knew that if he tried to flee, he would feel her claws in his back within seconds. He began his story. Once there was a vulture who built her nest in a palm tree, where she brooded over her eggs until they hatched, and she had 4 young. As soon as they emerged from their shells, they cried out for food, but the vulture dared not leave the nest because a wildcat lived on a nearby mountainside. Now it so happened that the wildcat herself had just given birth to 4 young, and she in turn did not dare leave her den because of the vulture. The young vultures and the kittens soon cried from hunger, so the 2 mothers met and made an agreement. Both the vulture and the wildcat swore solemnly by Ra that neither would attack the other's younglings. Thereafter, the vulture could safely fly away to search for carrion, and the wildcat could hunt in peace. For several weeks, everything went well, and the young vultures and kittens grew and thrived. The young vultures soon tested their wings, and the kittens began to play across the mountainside. One morning, as the vulture circled over the desert, the boldest of her young flew out of the nest. But his wings were still not very strong, and after a short flight, he landed on the slope where the kittens were playing and snatched a bite of their food. In a swift flash of anger, the wildcat attacked the young vulture and wounded him badly. "You must find your own food," snarled the wildcat. The young vulture flapped helplessly, but discovered that he could not fly. "Now I will never be able to return to my nest," he wailed. "But you have broken your oath, and Ra will avenge me." When the mother vulture returned to the nest with her beak full of carrion, she discovered that one of her young was missing, and soon found him lying dead on the mountainside. "So the cat has broken her vow," thought the vulture. "I shall soon take my revenge." The next time the wildcat went out hunting, the vulture swooped down upon the kittens. She killed them all, and then carried them home to her nest as food for her own young. When the wildcat returned with her prey, she could find none of her kitten. In desperate anguish, she searched the entire mountainside, but all she found were a few bloody tufts of fur. Then she understood that the vulture had killed her young, and she cried out to Ra for vengeance. "O great God who judges between the righteous and the wicked, the vulture has broken her sacred oath and murdered my children. Hear me, Ra, and punish this evildoer." The sun god heard her plea and became angry that an oath sworn in his name had been broken. Since the vulture had already taken revenge and killed all the kittens, Ra commanded a divine messenger to arrange a fitting punishment for her. The following day, as the vulture circled over the desert in search of food, she saw a lone hunter preparing a roast over his campfire. The vulture made a sudden dive, seized the meat with her claws, and flew triumphantly back to the nest. There she dropped it to her hungry young, but on the underside of the meat, there still clung several glowing embers. At the very moment the embers touched the dry twigs and grass of the nest, the entire nest burst into flames. The 3 young were burned alive while the mother circled helplessly above the nest. The wildcat leapt toward the blazing tree and cried up to the vulture, "You killed all my kittens, but now your children are dead as well, and I have had my revenge." "Thus, O gracious one," concluded Thoth his story to Horeth, "both mothers broke their oaths, and both received their punishment. Ra sees and hears all, and he punishes every transgression. Praise be to Ra, who gives life to all, whose radiant face brings joy to the whole earth. The Nile rises to form a mantle about him. The north wind and the south wind blow at his command as he journeys through the heavens above and beneath us. He rules from the heights of the sky to the depths of the ocean. Praise be to the sun god, and praise be to his daughter, Hathor." The goddess sat and pondered the tale and remembered her righteous and mighty father. Thoth saw his opportunity and crept closer. "Your grace, I have divine food with me, eaten only by those from the sun god's palace, remarkable herbs that bestow health and good fortune upon all who partake of them. He held out a pinch of herbs in one hand, and the wildcat could not help but sniff them when she sensed their delightful fragrance. At that very moment, when Hathor chose the divine food, her state of mind changed. All her anger vanished, and she listened attentively as Thoth spoke. "These herbs come from Egypt," said Thoth, "the land that rose from the waters of Nun, the place the Creator bestowed upon gods and humans alike, the land where Ra, your beloved father, and Shu, your dear brother, dwell." "What living being does not long to return to its homeland?" asked Thoth. "Even cliffs and plants cling to the soil of their birth. Animals live near the dens where they were born, just as humans regard it as the will of fate to live and die and be buried in the same place where they first drew breath. What more could one desire, and how could anyone live happily or rest in peace in a foreign land?" While Hathor raged through the desert, she had forgotten her home and her family. But Thoth's words made her remember. She thought of her father and her brother, and recalled all the temples where humans had worshipped her as the foremost among goddesses. Suddenly Hathor was overcome with longing for Egypt, and she burst into violent tears. Thoth watched her for a moment as she wept, then said gently, "O your grace, now it is you who mourn your homeland. But think of the flood of tears Egypt has shed for your sake. Without you, the temples are empty and silent. Without you, there is no music or dance, no laughter, and no drinking feasts. Without you, both young and old despair. But if you follow me home again, harps and tambourines, lutes and cymbals will once more sound. Egypt will dance, Egypt will sing. The two lands will rejoice as never before. Follow me, come home again, and I shall tell you another story as we journey northward. It is the tale of a hawk, a vulture, and a cuckoo who once met." Thoth set off, confident that Hathor would follow him, but suddenly the goddess realized that the baboon had all along only sought to lure her back to Egypt. Enraged that he had made her weep, she let out a terrifying scream and transformed herself into a gigantic lioness. Her fur was blood red and crackled and smoked as if from blazing fire. Her face shone brighter than the sun itself, and her dreadful gaze filled Thoth with terror. He leapt like a grasshopper, he trembled like a frog, and he greeted her as if she were the radiant sun itself. "O you mighty one, have mercy. In Ra's name I beg you, spare me. Gracious goddess, before you strike, listen to the tale of the two vultures." Hathor's anger softened a little, and she was curious about the story. Therefore, she transformed herself once more into the wildcat. Thoth began to speak quickly. "There were once two vultures who lived among the desolate mountains. One day, the first vulture boasted, 'My eyes are much sharper than yours, and my sight far better. There is no other living being with the same ability that I possess.' 'And what is this ability?' asked the other vulture. 'Whether it is day or night, I can see to the very ends of the world,' replied the first bird. 'High up in the heavens, or deep down in the oceans, I can see everything that happens.' 'Then let it be so that your eyes are sharper than mine, and your sight better,' conceded the other vulture. 'But my ears are sharper than yours, and my hearing is better. I can hear every sound from earth to sky and sea alike. I can even hear Ra's voice when he shapes the fate of all beings upon the earth." The two birds spent many days arguing about whose ability was the more valuable. But one morning, as they sat together on a branch in a dead tree, the second vulture suddenly began to laugh. "What are you laughing at?" asked his companion. "I am laughing at how swiftly the hunter can become the prey," replied the second vulture. "A bird from the far side of the heavens has just told me what he has witnessed. You would never be able to see him from such a distance. He saw a fly that was caught and eaten by a lizard. A moment later, the same lizard was caught and eaten by a snake. And shortly thereafter, a hungry falcon came and seized the snake. But the snake proved too heavy, and both falcon and snake plunged into the sea. You, with your keen sight, tell me what has become of them now." The first vulture stretched out his naked head and gazed across the desert toward the distant shoreline. "The falcon has been seized by a fish while still clutching the snake in its talons. Now the fish has been eaten by a larger fish." The vulture fell silent for a moment and continued, Now the great fish has swum close to land, and a lion has caught it with its paw. He is taking a fresh bite of the fish. The first vulture shook his feathers and flapped back and forth on the branch in excitement. A griffin! A griffin has just appeared and carried off the lion to its nest. Really? Are you certain? Can it truly be so? Asked the other bird. If you do not believe me, then fly with me to the griffin's nest and see for yourself, said the first vulture. So the two vultures lifted themselves from the branch and flew across the desolate mountain landscape until they were very near the griffin's lair. Look, whispered the first vulture. He has the head of a falcon and eyes like a man. He has the body of a lion, ears like fish fins, and a tail like a serpent. The two vultures watched as the griffin tore the last strips of flesh from the lion's bones, after which they flew away to a safer place. All that we have seen shows how Ra's power works in the world, began the first vulture. Even the death of a fly is noticed by the sun god, and those who kill will themselves be killed. Violence is always repaid with violence. Yet strangely enough, nothing has happened to the griffin, even though he devoured the lion. That must be because the griffin is Ra's messenger, replied the second vulture. The sun god has granted him the right to decide over life and death for all beings. There is nothing stronger than the griffin, except Ra's justice. Thus, your grace, it is so that good is rewarded with good, and evil with evil, concluded Thoth, and he has allowed you to partake of his power. You are the eye of the sun, his avenger. Hathor's heart beat violently with joy, and she was proud to be the daughter of the sun god. Enough shaking, promised the wildcat. I shall not kill you now. Your words have enchanted me, and I know you mean no harm. You have chased away my sorrow and my rage. Your grace, Thoth began cautiously. If you follow me, I shall guide you back to Egypt. It is only a few days' journey across these mountains. Let us go at once, quickly, growled Hathor, and speak no more of wasting time. The baboon began to walk toward Egypt, with the wildcat a few steps behind him. Thoth was still afraid that she might change her mind or lose her temper again, so he began to tell yet another story. There were once two jackals who lived in the desert, and they were very faithful friends. They hunted together, and they always ate and drank together, and always lay together in the shade. One day, as they were resting beneath the branches of a desert tree, they saw an angry lion coming toward them in great leaps. The two jackals stood perfectly still until the lion had reached them. This bewildered the lion, and he roared, "Have your legs grown stiff with age? Did you not see me coming? Why did you not run away?" "Lord Lion," replied the jackals, "we saw you rushing toward us in all your fury, and we decided not to run. You would have caught us in any case. And why should we exhaust ourselves when we were bound to be eaten anyway?" Because the mighty are not offended by the truth, the lion was amused by this calm answer, and he let the two jackals go. "What I have told you is nothing other than the pure truth," said Thoth. "And now that you have spared my life, we may walk together toward Egypt, and I can protect you." "You protect me?" "The eye of the sun needs not protection from a baboon. The strong can sometimes be saved by those who are weak," replied Thoth. "Think of the tale of the lion and the mouse." "What tale is that?" asked Hathor. And as they walked toward Egypt, Thoth told her the story. There was once a lion who lived in the desert. He was so great and strong and fierce that all the other animals feared him. One day, it happened that the lion encountered a panther lying on the ground, looking more dead than alive. The panther's fur was torn in large clumps, and he had deep, bleeding wounds all over his body. The lion was astonished, for he believed himself to be the only one strong enough to defeat a panther. "What has happened?" he asked. "What have done this to you?" asked the lion. "It was a man," sighed the panther. "There is no one more cunning than man. May you never cross his path." The lion had never heard of a creature called man, but he was angered that anyone could inflict such terrible wounds merely for pleasure. He decided to seek out man and set off in the direction from which the panther had come. After the lion had walked for about an hour, he met a mule and a horse who were harnessed together with metal bits that injured their sensitive mouths. "What have done this to you?" asked the lion. "It was a man, our master," said the horse. "Is man stronger than both of you together?" asked the lion. "Lord Lion," replied the mule, "there is no one as cunning as man. May you never cross his path." Now the lion grew angrier still, and more determined than ever to find and kill this terrible creature called man. He went on and soon met an ox and a cow bound together with a rope. Their horns had been sawn off, and metal rings were forced through their sensitive nostrils. When the lion asked who could have done such a thing, he received the same answer again. "It was man, our master. There is not a creature as cunning as man. May you never cross his path." The lion set off once more, and the next creature he encountered was a huge bear lumbering toward him. As the bear drew closer, the lion saw that he lacked both claws and teeth. "What have done this to you?" asked the lion. "Surely man cannot be stronger than you." "No, that is true," groaned the bear. "But man is cleverer. I captured man and made him my slave. But then he said, 'Lord, your claws are so long that it is hard for you to pick up food, and your teeth are so long that you can scarcely get food into your mouth. Let me even out your claws and teeth, and you will be able to eat twice as much.' I trusted him and allowed him to do as he wished. Then he pulled out my claws and filed down my teeth. After that, he was no longer afraid of me. He threw sand into my eyes and ran away laughing. When the lion heard this, he grew angrier than ever and ran on until he suddenly saw another lion who was trapped with one paw wedged in the trunk of a palm tree. "What has happened here?" asked the first lion. "Who has done this to you?" "It was man," growled the other lion. "Beware of him and never trust him. Man is evil. I made man my servant and asked what he could accomplish through work, for he looked so weak and miserable. He claimed he could make an amulet that would give me eternal life. 'Follow me,' said man, 'and I will turn this tree into an amulet. Do exactly as I say, and you will gain eternal life.' So I followed man to this palm, and he sawed a cut in the trunk and inserted a wedge. Then he told me to place my paw into it, and I did. Before I realized what was happening, he had pulled out the wedge. The split closed around my paw, and I could not pull it free. Then man threw sand into my eyes and ran away laughing. And now I must sit here until I starve to death." Then the first lion roared, "Man, I will hunt you down and make sure you pay for all the suffering you have brought upon other creatures." He ran on and soon came upon a small mouse. He raised his paw to crush it, but the mouse piped, "Oh, Lord Lion, do not kill me. I am so small that I would hardly make a mouthful for you. You would not even taste what you ate. Let me live, and perhaps one day I can repay my debt to you. Spare me now, and I shall help you when you are in need." The lion laughed. In what way could a miserable little mouse ever help the strongest of all animals? Besides, no one can ever harm me. "Lord Lion, sometimes the weak can help the strong," insisted the mouse, and he swore a solemn oath that he would become the lion's friend. The lion found it all very amusing, but since the mouse was hardly worth eating, he let him go. Meanwhile, man had heard the lion's roar and set traps for him. He dug a pit, laid a net of strong leather straps over the hole, and covered it with grass. That evening, when the lion came running in search of man, he fell into the pit and became tangled in the net. For hours he struggled to free himself, but he grew exhausted. At midnight, the great lion lay there waiting for dawn, when man would come and kill him. Suddenly he heard a small squeaking voice close to his ear. "Lord Lion, do you remember me? I am the mouse you spared, and now I have come to save you. Is there anything more wonderful than being repaid for a good deed?" The little mouse began gnawing at the leather straps. Hour after hour he worked until the lion was free, and just as dawn came he bit through the last strap. The lion leapt up and shook the net from himself. With the mouse clinging to his mane, the lion jumped out of the pit and fled from man, far away into the mountains of the desert. Fate had shown him that everyone eventually meets someone stronger than himself, and that the weak can indeed help the strong. Hathor understood the meaning of Thoth's story, and she followed the baboon with a new feeling of respect. Yet she did not seem in any particular hurry to return to Egypt. When they reached the edge of the desert, she lingered there, beneath date palms and sycamore figs and carob trees, praising their fruits. The baboon climbed into the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of Egypt. He tasted the fruits and found them good, but he told the goddess that the fruits of the Egyptian trees were even better, and so they continued their journey together. When they crossed the border, the people of Egypt gathered to welcome the returning goddess. At El Kab, she appeared to them in the form of a vulture, in the next city as a gazelle, but as they approached Thebes, she transformed herself once more into the wildcat. Before entering the city, she lay down to rest. Hathor fell asleep, and Thoth kept watch over her. Ra's enemies were not at all pleased that the Eye of the Sun had returned to Egypt. Under cover of darkness, a serpent crept from chaos toward the sleeping goddess, hoping to poison her, and by doing that, rob Ra of his protector. But the vigilant Thoth noticed the serpent just as it was about to strike, and he woke Hathor. The wildcat sprang upon the serpent and snapped its spine. She was very grateful that the baboon had warned her, and she remembered the story of the mouse who had saved the lion. The following morning, they entered Thebes, and the people were beside themselves with joy. A great festival was held in the Temple of Mut, lasting 7 days, with food and drink, music, dancing, and laughter. Hathor was so happy that she transformed herself from wildcat into a beautiful, gentle woman. After that, she let the baboon lead her farther north. In the holy city of Heliopolis, Ra was reunited with his daughter, and when they embraced, the people of Egypt wept with joy. A welcome festival was held in Sycamore House in Memphis, and all the gods and goddesses were present to celebrate Hathor's return. Then Thoth transformed himself back into his usual form, and at last Hathor recognized him again. He stood beside her during the feast, and Ra praised Thoth's wisdom, which had brought the Eye of the Sun home again. Part 6. The Fury of Ra. On the walls of the royal tombs and on the golden coffin that enclosed Tutankhamun's mummy were inscriptions from the Book of the Divine Cow, a book that tells how the sun god's wrath nearly destroyed humankind. Ra was old, and his bones were like silver, his flesh like gleaming gold, and his hair like lapis lazuli. When the people of Egypt saw how old and weak their king had become, they began to murmur in discontent, and this dissatisfaction soon turned into conspiracies aimed at overthrowing Ra from the throne. The conspirators met in secret in the desert, believing that no one could see them there. But when the sun god looked out over Egypt, he discovered the traitors and heard how they plotted their schemes. Ra was so sorrowful that he wished he could sink back down into the bottomless depths of the primeval sea. Yet at the same time, he grew angrier than he had ever been before. He said to his followers who stood gathered around his throne, "Bring me my daughter, the Eye of Ra. Send for the mighty Shu and Tefnut. Summon their children Geb and Nut. Bring the dark Ogdod, the 8 who were with me in the bottomless depths. Bring Nun himself, but let them all come here in secret. If the traitors learn that I have convened a council of the gods, they will know they have been discovered and will try to escape their punishment." Ra's servants hastened to do as he commanded. The great gods and goddesses received his message, and one by one they slipped quietly into the palace. They bowed before Ra's throne and asked why they had been summoned so urgently and in such secrecy. Then the king of the gods spoke to Nun, lord of the bottomless waters, and to the other gods, saying, "O, you eldest of all living beings, and all you other primordial gods, I wept, and from my tears humankind was born. I gave them life, yet now they are weary of me and plot against me. Tell me, what am I to do with them? I will not destroy the children of my tears before I have listened to your wise counsel." The first to speak was the water god Nun. "My son, you are older than your father and greater than the God who created you. May you rule for eternity. Both gods and humans fear the destroying power of the Eye of the Sun. Send this power against the rebels." Ra looked out over Egypt and replied, "The conspirators have fled far into the desert. They are afraid that I will uncover their plans and punish them." Then all the gods cried out with one voice, Send forth the eye of the sun against them. Let the eye of the sun destroy them. All humankind bears guilt. Let the eye go down to the earth as Hathor, and annihilate the children of your tears. Hathor, the eye of the sun, the most beautiful and the most terrifying of all goddesses, fell to her knees before the throne, and Ra nodded. Hathor descended into the desert like a raging lioness. The conspirators fled in all directions, but none could escape her. She seized them all and killed them, and drank their blood. Thereafter, the merciless Hathor left the desert, and stormed onward through villages and cities, killing all men, women, and children who crossed her path. Ra heard the prayers and screams of the dying humans, and began to pity the children of his tears. When darkness fell, Hathor returned triumphant to her father. "I greet you with peace in my heart," said Ra. He tried to calm his raging daughter, but Hathor had tasted human blood and wanted more. Already she longed for morning, when she could return to Egypt to finish slaughtering humankind and avenge Ra's betrayal. Soon no one would doubt Ra's power, but then he would no longer have any subjects left to rule over. The sun god pondered how he might save what remained of humankind from his fearsome daughter without breaking his royal word. Soon, he devised a plan. Ra commanded his followers to run faster than the wind to the city of Abu and gather all the red ochre they could find there. As soon as they returned with baskets full of red earth, he sent them out again to fetch Ra's high priest in Heliopolis, along with all the slave girls who worked in his temple. Ra ordered the high priest to grind the ochre into a red pigment and set the slave girls to work brewing beer. The high priest ground until his arms ached, and the slave girls worked frantically all night brewing 7,000 jars of beer. Just before dawn, the red pigment was mixed into the beer so that it looked like fresh blood. The king of the gods smiled. "With the help of this sleep drink, I can save humankind from my daughter." Then Ra had the jars of beer carried to the place where Hathor was to begin her killing, and commanded that the beer be poured out until the fields were dyed blood red. As soon as it grew light, Hathor came down to Egypt to rise up and kill those who still remained alive. The first thing she saw was a vast pool filled with blood. The goddess waded into the pool and was delighted by her own reflection in the red surface. She stopped to lick the blood and liked it so much that she drank the entire pool dry. The beer was strong, and the goddess soon found herself in a blissful intoxication. Her head spun, and she could no longer remember why she had been sent down to Egypt. Happily weary, Hathor returned on unsteady legs to Ra's palace and sank down at her father's feet, where she fell asleep and slept for several days. "Welcome, gentle Hathor," said Ra solemnly. "Humankind shall remember how they escaped your fury by drinking strong beer at all your festivals." The men and women who remained remembered, and from that day on, Hathor was always called the goddess of intoxication. During her festivals, the Egyptians could drink until they were drunk in the goddess's honor without anyone reproaching them. But Ra was still angry and sorrowful over humankind's rebellion. Nothing was ever the same again as it had been in the old good time before the betrayal. When Hathor finally awoke, she felt unlike herself in a way she never had before. Ra said, "What is wrong with your head? Is it hot in your cheeks? Do you feel ill?" When he spoke these words, illness entered Egypt for the first time. Thereafter Ra summoned the gods to yet another council and said, "My heart is far too sorrowful and weary for me to continue ruling as king in Egypt. I have grown old and weak. Therefore, let me sink down again into the bottomless depths of the primeval sea until the day comes for me to be born anew." Nun spoke at once. "Shu, protect your father, and you, Nut, carry him upon your back." "But how am I supposed to carry the mighty king of the gods?" Nut asked gently, whereupon Nun told her to transform herself into a cow. Then Nut transformed into an enormous cow with golden sides and long twisted horns, and Ra mounted the divine cow and rode out of Egypt. So that will conclude the first episode of this new series of mine. Please let me know what y'all thought about it. Did you like it? Or was it weird and strange and didn't make much sense? My sources for this script are a really old book, so there might be much that is outdated. but I really like these old fable stories. Anyway, leave a comment telling me what you thought of this video. And please, if you liked it, then please leave a like. I really would appreciate it. Take care, and I hope I see you all in the next one.